Welcome to the world of science fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss new stories. Enjoy the listening. The explosion rocked the slave ship, and Adam burst through the smoke-filled corridor. His eyes, sharp as a hawk's, scanned the dimly lit holding area. Cages lined the walls, most empty save for one. In it sat a woman unlike any Adam had ever seen. Her skin was a mesmerizing shade of blue, her figure sculpted to perfection. But it was her eyes that captivated him, pools of defiance barely masking a storm of despair. Adam's mind raced, processing 1,000 details in seconds. Fresh scratch marks marred the cage's bars, faint bloodstains on her knuckles, a slight tremor in her shoulders from exertion. "You tried to escape recently," he stated. Not a question but a fact. The woman's eyes widened fractionally. "How did you—" "No time," Adam cut her off, his fingers flying over the lock. "I'm Adam. I'm getting you out of here." The cage door swung open with a metallic groan. The woman hesitated, clearly torn between distrust and desperation. "You're strong," Adam observed, noting the defined muscles beneath her azure skin. "That's good. We'll need it. Now come on." She stood, graceful despite her confinement. "I'm Rui." Adam nodded curtly, already moving. "Stay close, Rui, and stay quiet." They crept through the corridors, Adam's eyes constantly roving. He cataloged every detail, the worn patches on the floor indicating frequent patrols, the slight discoloration around certain panels suggesting hidden security measures. "3 cameras in the next junction," he whispered. "We'll have 12 seconds of blind spot when we round the corner. Move fast." Rui stared at him, bewildered. "How could you possibly know that?" Adam's lips quirked in a humorless smile. "I notice things." They sprinted across the junction, Adam's timing impeccable. As they pressed against the wall on the other side, Rui's breath came in sharp gasps. "Who are you?" she hissed. "Someone who knows what it's like to be a slave," Adam replied, his voice hard. "Now quiet, guard approaching." Sure enough, heavy footsteps echoed moments later. Adam tensed, ready to strike. As the guard rounded the corner, Adam's hand shot out, catching the man's throat in a vice-like grip. A quick, brutal twist, and the guard crumpled silently. Rui's eyes widened in a mixture of fear and admiration. "You're very good at this." "Necessity," Adam grunted, already moving again. 2 levels down to the escape pods. You ready to run?" Rui nodded, determination replacing fear in her eyes. They descended through the ship, Adam dispatching guards with ruthless efficiency. Rui found herself marveling at his fluid movements, the way he seemed to anticipate every threat before it materialized. As they reached the escape pod bay, alarms began to blare. Adam cursed under his breath. "They've realized you're gone," he said, punching in launch codes. "We've got about 3 minutes before this place is swarming." The pod door hissed open. Adam ushered Rui inside, then paused, his keen eyes sweeping the bay one last time. "What is it?" Rui asked, anxiety creeping into her voice. Adam's brow furrowed. "Something's not right. The security response is too slow, too predictable. It's almost as if—" A massive explosion rocked the ship, cutting off his words. Adam dove into the pod, slamming the launch button. As they jettisoned into space, the slave ship erupted into a fireball behind them. In the sudden silence of the escape pod, Rui turned to Adam, her blue skin pale with shock. What just happened?" Adam's eyes were hard, calculating. Someone else wanted that ship destroyed, someone powerful enough to override its security systems. He met Rui's gaze, which begs the question, just how valuable are you exactly? Rui swallowed hard, fear and uncertainty warring in her expression. I don't know." Adam studied her for a long moment, taking in every minute detail, the fine quality of her clothing beneath the grime, The almost imperceptible accent in her speech, the way she held herself despite her ordeal. His mind word connecting dots invisible to most. "You're not just any slave," he said slowly. "You're someone important, someone dangerous to the wrong people." Rui's shoulders slumped, the fight seeming to drain out of her. "My family, they sold me. Said it was for the good of our people. I never understood why." Adam's expression softened fractionally. "Political intrigue, galactic power plays. You were a pawn in someone else's game." Rui looked up, a spark of her earlier defiance returning. "And now?" A ghost of a smile touched Adam's lips. "Now? Now you're a wild card. And in my experience, those are the most dangerous pieces on the board." The pod hurtled through space, leaving the destruction behind. But as Rui gazed out at the star-studded void, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a much larger story. Adam's voice broke through her reverie. "We need to find somewhere to lay low. I know a place in the outer rim, but it won't be comfortable." Rui turned to him, a wry smile on her face. "After that cage, anything's an improvement." Adam chuckled, a sound that seemed to surprise even him. "Fair point. Still, it won't be easy. We'll be hunted." "We?" Rui raised an eyebrow. "You don't have to involve yourself further. You've already done more than enough." Adam's expression turned serious. "I made a choice when I broke you out of that cage. I don't leave things half-finished." Rui studied him, curiosity overtaking caution. "Why did you save me? You don't know me. You owe me nothing." Adam was silent for a long moment, his eyes distant. When he spoke, his voice was low, tinged with old pain. "Because a long time ago, someone did the same for me, and I swore I'd pay it forward when I could." The vulnerability in his admission struck Rui. She reached out, hesitating only briefly before placing her hand on his arm. "Thank you," she said simply. Adam tensed at the contact, then slowly relaxed. He cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the moment of connection. "Yeah, well, don't thank me yet. We've still got to survive long enough to figure out why someone wants you badly enough to blow up an entire slave ship." Rui withdrew her hand, but a small smile played at her lips. "At least the company won't be boring." Adam snorted. "Boring is safe. Boring means you live to see another day." "And yet here you are, rescuing strange alien women and making powerful enemies," Rui countered. "Tache," Adam conceded. He turned to the pod's controls, plotting their course. "Get some rest if you can. Once we hit Atmo on Zeta 9, things are going to get interesting." Rui leaned back in her seat, watching Adam work. His fingers flew over the console with practiced ease, his eyes constantly darting between readouts. She marveled at the intensity of his focus, the way he seemed to process information at an inhuman rate. "You said you noticed things," she ventured after a while. "What do you notice about me?" Adam glanced at her, his gaze sweeping over her in a way that was analytical rather than appreciative. "You're from a wealthy family, but you've never had to work a day in your life. The calluses on your hands are fresh. You developed them fighting in that cage. Your posture suggests extensive education in etiquette, but there's a rebellious streak in the way you hold your chin." He paused, his eyes meeting hers. "You're scared, but you're also angry. And beneath all that, you're curious. Dangerously so." Rui blinked, taken aback by the accuracy of his assessment. "That's impressive, and slightly unnerving." Adam shrugged. "It's kept me alive so far." "And what do you think I notice about you?" Rui asked, a hint of challenge in her voice. Adam's lips quirked. "I think you notice that I'm trying very hard not to notice how attractive you are." Rui felt heat rise to her cheeks, the blue of her skin deepening. That's not what I meant." "No?" Adam's tone was light, but his eyes were sharp. "Then What did you mean? Rui took a breath, gathering her thoughts. I notice that you're haunted, that you carry yourself like a man who's always ready for a fight, and that despite your gruff exterior, you have a strong moral code. It was Adam's turn to look surprised. He opened his mouth to respond, but a warning light on the console interrupted him. Proximity alert, he muttered, all business once more. Looks like we've got company. Rui leaned forward, peering at the display. Slavers? Adam shook his head. Worse, bounty hunters. He met Rui's gaze, his expression grim. Hang on. This ride's about to get bumpy. As the pod accelerated, evading laser fire from their pursuers, Rui gripped her seat. Despite the danger, a part of her felt more alive than she had in years. She glanced at Adam, his face set in concentration as he piloted them through a field of asteroids. Whatever came next, she realized, life would certainly never be boring again. The escape pod hurtled through the asteroid field, Adam's hands dancing over the controls with preternatural speed. Laser fire from the pursuing bounty hunters illuminated the cramped cockpit in sporadic flashes of red. Hold on, Adam growled, yanking the steering yoke hard to port. The pod lurched, narrowly avoiding a massive chunk of space rock. Rui gripped her seat, knuckles turning a pale blue. I thought you said you knew how to fly this thing. I do, Adam replied, a hint of a smirk playing at his lips. I just never said I was any good at it. A particularly close blast rocked the pod, causing alarms to blare. Adam's eyes darted across the readouts, his mind processing the information at lightning speed. We've lost our rear deflector, he announced, voice tight. One more hit like that and we're space dust. Rui's eyes widened. Please tell me you have a plan. Adam's gaze locked onto a particularly dense cluster of asteroids ahead. As a matter of fact, I do. But you're not going to like it. Before Rui could protest, Adam plunged the pod directly into the heart of the asteroid swarm. Rui bit back a scream as massive rocks seemed to hurtle towards them from all directions. Adam's hands flew across the controls, making minute adjustments with impossible precision. The pod weaved through gaps that seemed far too narrow, missing collisions by mere inches. Behind them, one of the pursuing ships wasn't so lucky. It clipped an asteroid and spun out of control, exploding in a brilliant fireball. One down, Adam muttered, his focus never wavering. As they emerged from the other side of the asteroid cluster, Rui let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. That was incredible. Adam allowed himself a small grin. Thanks. Now let's hope it bought us enough time. He punched in a series of coordinates, and the pod's hyperdrive engaged with a lurch. The stars elongated into streaks of light, and then they were hurtling through the swirling blue tunnel of hyperspace. As the adrenaline of their narrow escape began to fade, Rui studied Adam's profile. His jaw was clenched, eyes still darting across the readouts as if expecting another threat to materialize at any moment. Where are we going? She asked, softly. Zeta 9, Adam replied, finally leaning back in his seat. It's a backwater planet in the outer rim. Not much there but sand and rocks, but it should be safe enough to lay low for a while. Rui nodded, then winced as the movement aggravated a bruise on her neck. Adam's sharp eyes caught the gesture immediately. You're hurt, he stated, reaching for a medkit stashed under the console. It's nothing, Rui protested, but Adam was already examining the injury with gentle fingers. Electrical burns, he observed, his voice hardening. From a neural whip, if I had to guess. Standard slaver equipment. Rui looked away, shame coloring her cheeks a deeper blue. They didn't appreciate my escape attempts. Adam's hands stilled for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was uncharacteristically soft. You survived. That's what matters. He applied a cooling salve to the burn, his touch clinical but not unkind. Rui found herself relaxing despite herself, lulled by the gentle hum of the hyperdrive and the unexpected tenderness of Adam's ministrations. "Why are you really helping me?" Rui asked, her eyes searching Adam's face. "It can't just be about paying forward an old debt." Adam's hand stilled on the bandage. He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the pod's viewport. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost reluctant. "Because every time I look at you, I see myself. That same fear, that same desperation." He paused, his jaw tightening. "And I remember what it was like to feel so powerless." Rui turned to face him, searching his eyes. For a brief moment she saw past the hardened exterior to the pain that lay beneath. "You were a slave too," she realized. Adam's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "A lifetime ago. But some scars never fade." Rui felt her breath catch. "How do you live with them?" Adam's eyes met hers, and in them she saw a mixture of pain and determination. "You don't let them define you. You use them. They become your armor, your motivation." The vulnerability in his admission stirred something in Rui. Without thinking, she reached out, placing her hand on his arm. Adam tensed at the contact but didn't pull away. "Thank you," she said simply, the words carrying the weight of everything left unsaid. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat the air between them seemed charged with possibility. Then Adam cleared his throat, pulling back slightly. "Get some rest," he said gruffly. "We've got a few hours before we reach Zeta 9, and I have a feeling we're going to need all the energy we can get." Rui nodded, settling back into her seat. As she drifted off to sleep, lulled by the hyperdrive's hum, her last conscious thought was of the enigma sitting beside her, a man capable of both ruthless efficiency and unexpected kindness. The pod touched down on Zeta 9 with a bone-jarring thud, kicking up a cloud of reddish dust. Adam powered down the engines and ran a quick systems check. "Well, it's not pretty, but we're in one piece," he announced, hitting the release for the hatch. As it hissed open, a wave of scorching air rushed in. Rui blinked against the sudden brightness shielding her eyes. "You weren't kidding about the sand and rocks," she muttered. Adam's lips quirked in a half-smile. "Told you it wasn't much to look at, but it's off the main trade routes, which means we should be able to stay under the radar for a while." He stepped out of the pod, his keen eyes already scanning their surroundings. The landscape was a sea of red dunes, broken only by the occasional outcropping of wind-carved stone. "There's an abandoned mining outpost about 2 clicks east," Adam said, pointing. "It'll give us shelter and a defensible position." Rui nodded, trying to ignore the way the harsh sunlight made her skin prickle uncomfortably. "Lead the way." They set off across the dunes, the twin suns of Zeta 9 beating down mercilessly. Adam moved with the easy grace of someone accustomed to harsh environments, while Rui found herself struggling to keep up. As they crested a particularly steep dune, Rui stumbled. Adam's hand shot out, steadying her with surprising gentleness. "You okay?" he asked, concern flitting across his features. Rui nodded, catching her breath. "Just not used to this kind of terrain." Adam's eyes narrowed, taking in details Rui couldn't begin to fathom. "Your homeworld is lower gravity, isn't it? And the atmosphere's denser. No wonder you're having trouble." Rui blinked, startled by his accuracy. "How could you possibly know that?" A ghost of a smile touched Adam's lips. "The way you move, your muscle development, the slight hesitation in your stride as you adjust to each step." Rui shook her head, a mixture of awe and unease washing over her. "Is there anything you don't notice?" Adam's expression turned serious. "Plenty. But in my line of work, missing details gets you killed." They continued on in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. As they approached the abandoned outpost, Adam held up a hand, motioning for Rui to stop. "What is it?" she whispered, tension coiling in her gut. Adam's eyes scanned the dilapidated buildings, taking in 1,000 tiny details. "Something's not right. The sand patterns are disturbed. Someone's been here recently." Rui felt her heart rate quicken. "Bounty hunters?" Adam shook his head. "No, this is different. Local scavengers, maybe. Still, we need to be careful." He led them around the perimeter of the outpost, moving with cat-like stealth. As they approached a half-collapsed storage shed, a flicker of movement caught Rui's eye. Before she could react, Adam was in motion. He tackled her to the ground just as a blaster bolt sizzled through the air where her head had been moments before. "Stay down," Adam ordered, already rolling to his feet. 3 figures emerged from the ruins, brandishing an assortment of cobbled-together weapons. Their clothing marked them as locals, desperate scavengers eking out a living on this harsh world. "We don't want trouble," Adam called out, his hands raised placatingly. "We're just looking for shelter." The leader, a grizzled human with cybernetic implants glinting in the sunlight, sneered. "Shelter ain't free, off-worlder. You want to stay, you pay the price." Adam's eyes darted between the 3 scavengers, assessing the threat. Rui could almost see the calculations running behind his eyes. "How about a trade?" Adam offered. "We've got supplies in our pod, food, water, medical supplies, more than enough to make it worth your while." The scavengers exchanged glances, clearly tempted, but the leader's cybernetic eye whirred, focusing on Rui. "Or maybe we just take the girl," he growled. "Bet she'd fetch a pretty price with the right buyer." Adam's posture shifted subtly, and Rui could feel the sudden tension radiating off him. When he spoke, his voice was deathly calm. "That's not an option." The leader's grin widened, revealing stained teeth. "Ain't up to you, pretty boy." He raised his blaster, but Adam was already moving. In a blur of motion too fast for Rui to follow, he closed the distance between them. There was a sickening crunch as Adam's fist connected with the leader's face, sending him sprawling. The other 2 scavengers opened fire, but Adam was a step ahead. He dove and rolled, coming up with the leader's dropped blaster in hand. 2 precise shots later, and the scavengers lay groaning on the ground, clutching non-lethal wounds. Rui stared, wide-eyed, as Adam calmly disarmed the fallen attackers. "That was impressive." Adam shrugged, but Rui could see the tension still thrumming through him. "Like I said, in my line of work you learn to read people and situations." He turned to the leader, who was struggling to sit up, blood streaming from his broken nose. "Now, let's try this again. We need shelter. You need supplies. I think we can work something out that doesn't involve anyone else getting hurt. What do you say?" The leader glared balefully, but nodded. "Fine. But don't think this makes us friends." Adam's lips quirked in a humorless smile. "Wouldn't dream of it." As they helped the wounded scavengers into the relative coolness of the outpost's main building, Rui found herself watching Adam with new eyes. The efficiency with which he'd neutralized the threat was impressive, but it was the control he'd shown, disabling rather than killing, that truly caught her attention. Once inside, Adam set about treating the scavengers' wounds with the same clinical detachment he'd shown when tending to Rui earlier. As he worked, he kept up a steady stream of questions, gleaning information about the planet, recent visitors, and potential threats. Rui marveled at his ability to extract information while appearing casual. By the time he'd finished, she was certain he knew more about Zeta 9 than people who'd lived there for years. As night fell, bringing with it a bone-deep chill, Adam and Rui retired to a small room they'd claimed as their own. Adam immediately set about fortifying their position, rigging makeshift alarms and clearing lines of sight. Rui watched him work, a question burning on her tongue. Finally, she couldn't hold back any longer. "Earlier, with the scavengers," she began hesitantly, "you could have killed them easily. Why didn't you?" Adam paused in his work, his back to her. For a long moment he was silent, and Rui feared she'd overstepped. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, weighted with memory. "Because a long time ago, someone showed me mercy when they could have ended my life. It changed things." He turned to face her, and Rui was struck by the intensity in his eyes. "Life's cheap out here on the rim, but that doesn't mean it isn't valuable." Rui nodded, feeling as though she was seeing a new side of this enigmatic man. "You're full of surprises, Adam." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I try to keep things interesting." As they settled in for the night, Rui found herself hyper-aware of Adam's presence nearby. He was a puzzle she couldn't quite solve, capable of both ruthless efficiency and unexpected compassion. Just as she was drifting off to sleep, a thought struck her. "Adam?" she murmured. "Hmm? Thank you for saving me. Again." In the darkness, she couldn't see his expression, but she heard the soft intake of breath before he replied. "Get some rest, Rui. Something tells me we're going to need it." As sleep claimed her, Rui's last conscious thought was that maybe, just maybe, she'd found someone she could trust in this vast, uncaring galaxy. The harsh light of Zeta 9's twin suns filtered through the cracks in the abandoned outpost walls, rousing Adam from his fitful sleep. His eyes snapped open, instantly alert. Years of honed instinct had him reaching for his blaster before he even registered the sound that had woken him, a faint, rhythmic beeping from the makeshift communications array he'd cobbled together the night before. He glanced at Rui, still peacefully asleep on her makeshift bed. The blue of her skin seemed to glow in the dim light, a stark reminder of how different, how valuable she was. Adam allowed himself a moment to study her, noting the way her chest rose and fell with each breath, the slight furrow of her brow even in sleep. Then he shook off the distraction and moved silently to the comm unit. The message was encrypted, but Adam's deft fingers made quick work of the security protocols. As the data streamed across the screen, his eyes widened. This was far bigger than he'd imagined. "Rui," he called softly, his voice tight with urgency. "Wake up, we've got a problem." Rui stirred, her eyes blinking open. "What is it?" she asked, instantly alert at the tension in Adam's voice. Adam's jaw clenched as he processed the information before him. "It's worse than we thought. The slave trade. It goes all the way to the top. The Galactic Council is involved." Rui sat up, shock evident on her face. "That's impossible. The Council is supposed to protect. They're supposed to do a lot of things." Adam cut her off, his voice bitter. "But power corrupts, and there's no greater power than controlling the lives of others." He turned the screen towards her, pointing out key details in the data. "Look at these shipping manifests, these financial transactions. They're using diplomatic channels to move slaves, laundering money through shell corporations." Rui's eyes scanned the information, her face growing paler with each revelation. Suddenly, she froze, her finger hovering over a familiar name. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It can't be." Adam leaned in, following her gaze. His sharp eyes caught the name immediately, a high-ranking official from Rui's home planet. "You know them," he stated, not a question. Rui nodded, her voice hollow. "It's my father." The silence that followed was heavy, charged with shock and betrayal. Adam watched as a myriad of emotions played across Rui's face: disbelief, anger, grief. "I'm sorry," he said softly, surprising himself with the genuine empathy in his voice. Rui's eyes met his, filled with a steely determination that almost made him step back. "Don't be. This ends now." Adam nodded, a plan already forming in his mind. We need to expose this, bring down the whole operation. But it won't be easy. We're talking about some of the most powerful people in the galaxy. Then we'll need to be smarter, Rui said, her voice gaining strength. Faster, better. A ghost of a smile touched Adam's lips. Now you're talking my language. He turned back to the comm unit, fingers flying over the keys. I've got some contacts, people who owe me favors. We'll need resources, transportation. As he spoke, laying out the bones of a plan, he could feel Rui's eyes on him. When he glanced up, he was struck by the intensity of her gaze. "What?" he asked, suddenly self-conscious. "You're in your element," she observed. "This is what you do, isn't it? Take on impossible odds, right wrongs." Adam shrugged, uncomfortable with the admiration in her voice. "I just do what needs to be done." Rui stepped closer, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "Well, I'm glad you're on my side." For a moment, Adam allowed himself to feel the warmth of her touch, the connection between them that had been growing stronger with each passing day. Then he cleared his throat, refocusing on the task at hand. "We'll need to move fast," he said, already packing up their meager supplies. "The longer we wait, the more chance they have of covering their tracks." Rui nodded, her face set with determination. "Where do we start?" Adam's eyes gleamed with a mixture of excitement and danger. "We're going to the heart of it all, the Galactic Council's headquarters on Centauri Prime." As they prepared to leave the relative safety of their hideout, Adam found himself watching Rui out of the corner of his eye. She moved with a new purpose, her earlier vulnerability replaced by a fierce determination. He realized, with a mixture of pride and concern, that she was no longer the scared, escaped slave he'd rescued. She was becoming a force to be reckoned with in her own right. "Ready?" he asked as they stood at the threshold of the abandoned outpost. Rui met his gaze, her blue skin seeming to shimmer with an inner fire. "Ready." Together, they stepped out into the harsh sunlight of Zeta 9, leaving behind the relative safety of their hideout and heading towards a confrontation that would shake the very foundations of the galaxy. The journey to Centauri Prime was a blur of hyperspace jumps, close calls, and tense planning sessions. Adam called in every favor he was owed, piecing together the resources they'd need for their audacious plan. Rui, for her part, proved to be a quick study, absorbing Adam's lessons on stealth, combat, and subterfuge with an eagerness that both impressed and worried him. As their stolen ship dropped out of hyperspace in view of Centauri Prime, Adam felt a familiar tension coil in his gut. The planet before them was a glittering jewel, its surface a patchwork of sprawling cities and carefully manicured wilderness preserves. It was beautiful, serene, and home to some of the most corrupt individuals in the galaxy. "Impressive, isn't it?" Rui murmured, her eyes fixed on the approaching world. Adam grunted, his hands flying over the ship's controls as he initiated their approach sequence. "Don't let the shine fool you. There's rot at the core of that pretty picture." Rui's expression hardened. "Then let's cut it out." They landed at a small, private spaceport on the outskirts of the capital city. As they disembarked, Adam's keen eyes swept their surroundings, cataloging 1,000 tiny details. The wear patterns on the landing pad, the positioning of the security cameras, the subtle tension in the body language of the spaceport workers. It all painted a picture, one that set his nerves on edge. "We're being watched," he muttered to Rui as they made their way towards the exit. Rui nodded almost imperceptibly, her posture relaxed, but her eyes alert. "I noticed. The man by the fuel pumps hasn't actually refueled a single ship since we landed." Adam allowed himself a small smile. She was learning fast. They moved through the crowded streets of the capital, blending in with the throngs of beings from 100 different worlds. Adam led them on a circuitous route, doubling back and changing direction seemingly at random. To the casual observer, they might have looked like lost tourists, but Adam was systematically losing any tails and gathering intel with each carefully chosen detour. As night fell, they found themselves in a dingy bar in the city's industrial district. The clientele was rough, a mix of dock workers, low-level criminals, and those who preferred to conduct their business away from prying eyes. Adam slid into a booth in the back corner, his eyes never stopping their constant scan of the room. Rui sat across from him, her blue skin hidden beneath a hooded cloak. "So," she said, her voice low, "what's the next move?" Adam leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. "We need access to the Council's secure networks. There's a data hub 2 levels below the main chamber. If we can get in there, we can download everything we need to expose the whole operation." Rui's eyes widened. "That's ambitious. The security will be insane." A ghost of a smile touched Adam's lips. "That's where you come in. Your father's access codes should still be valid. We use those to get in the door, then I'll handle the rest." Rui's face clouded at the mention of her father, but she nodded resolutely. "And once we have the data, we broadcast it to every news outlet, every planetary government, every being with a comms unit in the galaxy." Adam's eyes gleamed with a fierce intensity. "We tear down their whole corrupt system in one fell swoop." As he spoke, Adam's sharp eyes caught a flicker of movement near the bar. A man in nondescript clothing was watching them a bit too intently, his hand hovering near a concealed weapon. "We've got company," Adam murmured. His posture relaxed, but his muscles coiled for action. "When I give the signal, head for the back exit. Don't look back. Don't hesitate." Rui nodded, her face a mask of calm despite the tension thrumming through her. The next few moments passed in a blur of action. Adam's hand shot out, flipping their table towards their would-be assailant. In the same fluid motion, he drew his blaster and fired, the shot catching the man in the shoulder and sending him sprawling. "Now!" Adam shouted, already moving towards the exit. They burst out into the night air, the sounds of chaos erupting behind them. Adam led them through a maze of back alleys and service corridors, his encyclopedic knowledge of the city's layout guiding their escape. As they finally slowed, catching their breath in the shadow of a towering hab block, Rui turned to Adam with a mixture of exhilaration and fear in her eyes. "How did you know?" she gasped. "About the assassin? About the escape route?" Adam's eyes met hers, a hint of a smile playing at his lips despite the gravity of their situation. "I told you, I noticed things. The way he held himself, the bulge of a concealed weapon, the fact that he ordered a drink but never touched it. As for the escape, let's just say I've had to make a few hasty exits in my time." Rui shook her head in amazement. "You're incredible, you know that?" For a moment, the facade of the hardened operative cracked, and Rui caught a glimpse of genuine emotion in Adam's eyes. But before he could respond, the wail of approaching sirens jolted them back to reality. "We need to move," Adam said, his voice regaining its professional edge. "The council building isn't far. It's now or never." Rui nodded, her face set with determination. "Let's finish this." They moved through the city like ghosts, using Adam's intimate knowledge of its layout to avoid patrols and security checkpoints. As they approached the imposing edifice of the Galactic Council headquarters, Adam felt a familiar mix of tension and exhilaration coursing through him. This was what he lived for, the thrill of the impossible mission, the chance to right wrongs on a cosmic scale. But as he glanced at Rui, saw the fierce determination in her eyes, he realized that this time was different. For the first time in years, he wasn't just fighting for a cause, he was fighting for someone. The thought both thrilled and terrified him. They slipped into the council building through a service entrance, Rui's stolen access codes granting them entry. As they made their way deeper into the heart of galactic power, Adam's senses were on high alert, cataloging every detail of their surroundings. "The data hub is 2 levels down," he whispered as they ducked into an empty office to avoid a passing security detail. "Once we're in, we'll have maybe 10 minutes before they realize something's wrong." Rui nodded, her face a mask of concentration. "What do you need me to do?" Adam allowed himself a small smile. "Just watch my back and be ready to run like hell when I give the word." They made their way to the restricted elevator that would take them to the data hub. As Adam worked on bypassing the security protocols, Rui kept watch, her every sense straining for any sign of approaching danger. Suddenly, the elevator doors hissed open. Adam and Rui stepped inside, the tension between them palpable as they descended into the heart of the conspiracy that had upended both their lives. The data hub was a cavernous room filled with rows upon rows of blinking servers. Adam moved with purpose, his fingers flying over consoles as he began the process of extracting the damning evidence they needed. "How long?" Rui asked, her eyes constantly scanning for threats. 5 minutes, Adam replied, his focus never wavering from the task at hand. "Maybe less if we're lucky." But luck, it seemed, was not on their side. Just as the data transfer reached its halfway point, alarms began to blare throughout the facility. "We've been made," Adam growled, his hands moving even faster across the controls. "Get ready to run." Rui nodded, her body tensed for action, but as the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridors, a look of realization crossed her face. "Wait," she said, her voice filled with a sudden certainty. "I have an idea." Before Adam could protest, Rui stepped out into the open, her hood thrown back to reveal her distinctive blue skin. As the first security team rounded the corner, their weapons raised, she spoke in a voice that rang with authority. "Stand down," she commanded. "I am Rui, daughter of Counselor Zaxeth. This man is my personal security detail, and we are conducting an authorized security audit of these systems." Adam watched in amazement as the guards hesitated, clearly thrown by the unexpected appearance of a council member's daughter in a restricted area. Rui continued, her voice never wavering. "If you'd like to verify my credentials, please contact my father immediately. I'm sure he'll be thrilled to explain why his daughter is wandering around in secure areas without proper clearance." The lead guard lowered his weapon, uncertainty written across his face. I'm sorry, my lady. We weren't informed of any audit." "That's rather the point of a security test, isn't it?" Rui replied, her tone dripping with aristocratic disdain. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we have work to finish." As the guards retreated, clearly unwilling to risk angering a council member, Adam couldn't help but stare at Rui in admiration. "That," he said with a low whistle, "was impressive." Rui's face broke into a grin, the adrenaline of their close call evident in her eyes. "I learned from the best. Now, let's finish what we came here for." They turned back to the console, the data transfer now complete. Adam quickly began the process of broadcasting the damning evidence to every corner of the galaxy. As the information began to flow out, exposing the corruption at the heart of the Galactic Council, Adam felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Years of fighting against an seemingly unbeatable enemy, and now, "It's done," he said softly, almost in disbelief. "We actually did it." Rui's hand found his, squeezing gently. "We did it together." Their eyes met, and in that moment all the unspoken feelings between them came rushing to the surface. Without thinking, Adam pulled Rui close, their lips meeting in a kiss that was equal parts passion and relief. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Adam couldn't help but chuckle. "You know," he said with a wry grin, I usually wait until after the daring escape to kiss the girl. Rui's eyes sparkled with mischief. Since when do you follow the rules? Their moment of joy was interrupted by the sound of approaching alarms. The ruse with the guards wouldn't hold for long, and they still needed to get out of the building alive. Ready for one last adventure? Adam asked, his hand already reaching for his blaster. Rui nodded, her face set with determination. Always. Together they raced towards an uncertain future, but one thing was clear. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them side by side. 5 years later, on a quiet world far from the bustle of the galactic core, Adam stood on the porch of a modest home, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues. The sound of laughter drew his attention, and he couldn't help but smile as he saw Rui chasing their young daughter through the tall grass. The fall of the corrupt council and the subsequent upheaval in galactic politics had been tumultuous, but out of the chaos, a new and more just order had begun to emerge. Slavery had been abolished across known space, and efforts were underway to right the wrongs of centuries of exploitation. Adam and Rui had played their part in shaping this new future, using their unique skills and experiences to help build a better galaxy. But they had also found something they both thought impossible: a home, a family, a place to belong. As Rui approached, their giggling daughter in her arms, Adam felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the setting suns. "What are you thinking about?" Rui asked, her azure skin glowing in the golden light of sunset. Adam smiled, reaching out to caress their daughter's cheek. "Just how far we've come, how different everything is now." Rui nodded, understanding the weight of his words. "We've built something beautiful, haven't we?" Their daughter, a perfect blend of her parents with lighter blue skin and Adam's sharp eyes, squirmed in Rui's arms. "Daddy, can we go look at the stars tonight? You promised to show me where you and Mommy had your first adventure." Adam chuckled, taking the child into his arms. "Of course, Frida. Right after dinner. But first, let's help your mother set the table." As they turned to go inside, Adam's wrist communicator beeped. He glanced at it, his expression turning serious for a moment. Rui noticed immediately. "Another mission?" Adam nodded. "Looks like there's trouble brewing in the Outer Rim. Some remnants of the old guard trying to revive the slave trade." Rui's eyes flashed with determination. "Well, we can't let that happen, can we?" "No, we can't," Adam agreed, a familiar thrill of excitement running through him. He looked down at Frida. "But this time, little one, you'll be staying with Aunt Zara. Mommy and Daddy have some important work to do." Frida pouted for a moment, but quickly brightened. "Can I practice my observation skills while you're gone, like you taught me, Daddy?" Adam grinned, ruffling her hair. "Absolutely. You'll be the sharpest-eyed kid in the galaxy by the time we get back." As they headed inside to prepare for the upcoming mission and Frida's stay with Aunt Zara, Adam felt a profound sense of contentment. The galaxy was still far from perfect, but they were making it better, one day at a time, and more importantly, they were doing it together. The adventure that had brought them together had never really ended. It had simply evolved, becoming richer and more meaningful with each passing year. As Adam watched Rui and Frida chatting excitedly about stargazing later, he knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as a family. The sun finally dipped below the horizon, and the first stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky. Adam took a deep breath of the cool evening air, feeling truly at peace. He had found his place in the universe, not in a location, but in the hearts of those he loved. With one last look at the star-filled sky, Adam turned and went inside, ready to embrace whatever new adventure awaited them. After all, with Rui by his side and Frida to come home to, there was no challenge too great, no odds too impossible to overcome. The galaxy was vast and full of wonders, and their greatest journey was only just beginning. Well, dear listener, you've made it to the end of our cosmic roller coaster. Congratulations on surviving slave traders, corrupt politicians, and the occasional bad space pun. I hope you enjoyed this tale of love, liberation, and learning to notice the little things, like the dust on a bounty hunter's boots or the way your blue-skinned alien crush looks at you under the light of twin suns. If you're now feeling the urge to go out and overthrow an intergalactic corrupt government, maybe start smaller. Try reorganizing your sock drawer first. It's less likely to result in a price on your head. Thank you for lending your ears, or whatever auditory organs you possess, to this adventure. Remember, in the vast expanse of the universe, you too can find love, justice, and a really cool spaceship. Just watch out for those pesky tractor beams. Until our next journey among the stars, keep your blaster charged and your heart open. Who knows? Your own blue-skinned beauty might be waiting just around the next nebula.